Hello and welcome back to The Halfway Point. Today we're talking about the importance of the significant event processes, and I'm pleased to be joined by Tom and Jermaine, who are the co-founders of My Practice Manager. Hi guys.
Hi.
So the significant event process is a really important process within practices. You know, every practice is required to do it. CQC expect it, and it appears in the policies and minute meetings kind of throughout our working days. But do we always use it well? So an opening question to you guys then is, how are you finding the experience of significant events within practice with your roles of MyPM and collating the data from practices? What do you guys see?
Jermaine, I think when we started talking about this, you've got the experience of working in a practice, haven't you? And I was surprised by, kind of shocked by the idea of doing more of them is better. So I kind of thought that it would be a one-off event that you did when someone got really hurt. But I think you said the exact opposite, and that kind of that was more surprising, but it kind of made sense as soon as you said it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think certainly in my practice over the years, as we've grown from one site over to 3 sites, the key has been making sure the managers at each site or the management team that I'm being supported by are aware of significant events and the importance of logging little things as well as big things, so that the little things are preventable into big things in the future. And I suppose what comes with that are the challenges of actually writing an SEA. It feels a bit scary. And certainly we've seen that a lot in My Practice Manager as well. So people that have been using us have been delegating writing SEAs because we've now made it simple or easier for them to deputy managers, maybe secretaries who are taking minutes of meetings where the SEAs have been discussed. And we've seen lots of use cases. So again, with My Practice Manager, we've seen perhaps new practice managers or people that are new to the industry that don't perhaps know what good outcomes look like, that are perhaps fed the issue into My Practice Manager and tried to explore what some of the suggestions are from our platform to then maybe form the basis of a discussion as well. So lots of different use cases, but the key is around the idea that as many SEAs as possible with a view to logging little things as SEAs so that they don't become big things in the future.
So looking at My Practice Manager then, so kind of expanding on that, how's that as a platform come about from you guys? What was the spark, if you like, that created the idea to create it? And kind of just alluding on what you were saying there, how have you found that the tool now supports practices?
So originally, there's lots of good support tools out there. But one of the things that happened, particularly in my practice, was we grew from a few sites to more than a few sites to 3 sites quite quickly. And we went through a lot of changes at the time. So we went through things like moving the phones over to one site and building a bit of a call center, making the other sites purely clinical and front of house. And there was lots of discussions that came from that, particularly SEA. So if there was an incident, how is that escalated? How are the staff rotating between the sites so they feel supported and things like that? And one of the things that Tom and I had a conversation about at the time was how can we build a good package that not only makes people accountable for key tasks. So obviously with the task manager, which you'll know about, how can we make sure that a site that we perhaps don't visit as often, that passes all its regulatory checks. So weekly building checks and pat testing and things like that. But also how can people communicate and let me know that if they're in charge of that site, that task has been done. And then it moved into things like, so if we're bringing in new reception manager, which happened, and they're having HR discussions with staff, and we're trying to make them more accountable or take a lot more queries away from me, so as I'm getting busier. Again, over the years, our list size has grown from 10,000 to just under 19,000 patients now. And with that structure that comes in, it's upskilling the staff to be able to have sort of high level conversations without necessarily involving you. So then we started to build the AI platform, which has things like policy writers, plate responders, has simple things like the ability to write supportive emails to staff so it come across in the correct way. So it grew from my practice, and then we sort of realized we were onto something and started to push that out to other practices, and we've kind of grown a lot over the last year or so.
And I'd say that the one thing I'd kind of feed on from that as well is that a lot of other industries have kind of techniques that we can just straightforward steal. So my background's more kind of technology. So we can just sort of say, well, platforms exist to manage tasks. Now the tasks in a practice are around are more cyclical. They happen and then they happen again and they're recurring. So and then the solutions out there for say software, which is very much more project based, don't work as well. But that still doesn't mean that we shouldn't have every area of every type of of organisations should have a good set of tools. And then, going back to the SEA side, it's just, what bit needs humans involved? Well, the bit where you're actually talking about the problem. The bit where you're talking about the problem absolutely needs the humans involved and needs the clinicians to go, okay, well, I did this and I should have done this. And that was a systemic problem or whatever. But then the actual writing up of what that is, in terms of, you've got your notes that you understand what they mean, but then turning that into something that anyone can understand afterwards, that is nowadays fairly straightforward for an AI to accomplish, and means that you're getting a fairly consistent product out of that. It means that you can have more of those high value conversations and less of the kind of low value. And that's what other industries are doing all of the time, right? They put tools around the low value tasks, the low value things that people do on a daily basis, so that the high value gets more frequent. And that's kind of been our philosophy of my PM as well, is just like, let's figure out all the low value stuff that people do that takes all of their energy, and let's move it up the value chain to the high value stuff that they could be doing if they weren't typing out a policy. Policy has like 3 or 4 choices that you need to make, or an SOP has 3 or 4 choices that you need to make. Like, how am I going to do this? What are my strategies? The rest of it is boilerplate, and it's important boilerplate, and you have to get it right. But it is, it's not good enough to just have one standard template. Maybe you want to do something different, but it's also not. You don't have to write every single detail and get it all right and get all the formatting right. You just need to know what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to, what's important to you, etc. So that's kind of where we go.
So the significant event writer that we developed a few months into adding some other products, it came a bit later on. It came from the idea that within, as Tom's talking about, so within our practice, I was really, really keen to make sure that we have. My biggest fear is not passing a CQC inspection, right? Significant events is a huge part of that, and to show and to demonstrate that you've got learnings. It's bigger than just having a written SEA. There's demonstrable learning from things like minutes of meetings where you've discussed the SEA, pre and post type up, audits to check that the changes you put in place later, you've actually tested them and making sure they're working. And I suppose with the significant events, the struggle that I've found, and a lot of the practice managers that we're supporting and conversations with colleagues in Manchester, came from the idea that it was, depending on who you'd asked to type up the SEA, there was varying levels of output, really, I suppose. So it might be that you were discussing a case to do with a patient and the wrong antibiotic was prescribed, for example, and perhaps after discussing it at the meeting, you might have tasked a GP to write that up for you, and they're time pressured, and their typing up of an SEA might be a couple of lines, and it would all read perfectly well, and it all makes total sense, and it's completely safe. And then we might discuss a bit of an admin issue. So, for example, someone locked up last Friday night and left the window open, which triggered the alarm, and that's still an SEA. And you perhaps might ask your admin team lead or your admin manager to type that up as an SEA. And again, the output might not be guaranteed. This was just a way of standardizing the output of SEAs across every team member, with the ability to add as much or as little detail into the input of that in our platform, and it comes out in the standard format with lots of control measures. And again, it might put stuff in there that you hadn't thought of, which could then perhaps give you some space to think about, oh, do I need to think about that? Or you could just simply take it out by modifying it and make sure that the output reads exactly how you wanted it. But the point is, what we've now got a year on after using this is we've got beautifully formatted SEAs in the same format, regardless of who's writing the SEAs, all collated into a table, which we can just show the CQC, which is sort of a lifesaver.
Oh, it's gold. It's perfect, isn't it? It's the gold standard.
Yeah.
And it's encouraging to hear that you're seeing practices now kind of change how they almost adapt and look at the SEAs, in that it's not just about the incident itself, it's that full learning culture. And do you find from that then, because there's always a fear as well with staff around like the blame culture of significant events, and that it will come down on an individual or a group of people, do you find kind of with this approach of having a standardization across the practice with it, has that gone away, or is that still there? How are you finding, how have the staff taken it on, if you or received it, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to complaints, isn't it? So often people don't know where to start with complaints, and sometimes complaints can feel a lot they can weigh heavier on us than actually the outcome, because we naturally worry about things, and naturally if we feel like we've done harm to somebody, that weighs heavy on us. Similarly to SEAs, if taking the example of the window that was left open that triggered the alarm, apart from the fact that Tom knows, I think I texted him, but apart from the fact I had to go down to the practice at 10 o'clock at night, I'm not really that bothered. But the point is, the admin team manager might have spoke to that staff member and made them feel really bad about it, and that's not what we want. We just want to demonstrate that actually this happened. What can we do to prevent it happening again in the future? And that's the whole purpose of an SEA, isn't it? It's not to apportion blame, it's not to make sure someone is accountable for this incident. It's just to say, look, this has happened. How can we prevent it happening in the future?
And it's an interesting philosophy, kind of philosophy of how to run a practice as well. And I think this fits into what we're trying to build as well, which is make it a bit more systemized. You don't look at in a system, you don't blame individuals. In a system, you look at how the system worked or didn't work and what led then to that. If you have a event, does that mean that your standard operating procedures are inadequate, or does it mean that your auditing is inadequate, or whatever? It's not about the individuals. If you to blame an individual says that people have these roles, they're very hard to change. If someone's sick, you've got no capability to do that thing anymore. Whereas in a system, in a kind of more systemized approach, it's very much like it's everyone's responsibility to get the practice working in a way, and we do that by having, shared tasks and the ability for anyone to take on the ability to create things and that. And I think that's, from a technology point of view, I think that's what you ought to be doing more of in practice, is honestly kind of trying to systemize them, not remove the humanity from them, but just, I don't know, make it more repeatable, so that you can then look at it and go, okay, well, this was the procedure. We didn't follow the procedure. Let's follow the procedure next time. It'll work. Or this procedure, it had an error.
I think just following through that conversation, I think that's how we've kind of grown My Practice Manager, and it's become very popular because the process of an SEA, once it's typed up and you've thought about everything that was discussed in the meeting, it's very overwhelming then to walk away from that and think, I've got to then go and do these 5 actions now. So it might be that you've got to update your policy because there's a policy change or an operating procedure change. It might be that then you've got to go and set up an audit and speak to a staff member to set up a new audit. So it could be like run a search on EMIS and run this every week. It could be that you need to then go and speak to some people who are providing a service if it's incident with a third party provider. Certainly thinking about that journey where you need to update a policy, that's when then we're seeing people, and that's what I'm doing in my practice, using My Practice Manager. I'll then take my existing policy that I want to change, I'll feed it into our policy manager, I'll feed the SEA in that we've just discussed, and I'll just put a little description at the bottom and saying, this is our existing policy, this is the SEA we've had, this is what needs to change, update it for me. And it's done in it's now a 5-10 minute task with review and sign off and cascading it to staff members to re-sign. Whereas in the past, that's probably like a day job, and it feels very overwhelming on top of everything you've got to do as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that and how, and I'm almost ashamed to admit it now, but it's like you look at those tasks and think, when am I going to do it? And then, does it happen? Does the write-up happen accurately? And sometimes the answer is no on that front, because you're overwhelmed by how much follow-up work there is to do. So I think you're right in that the more you can, I was going to simplify, but it's not even simplifying, but the more you can automate and have an accurate recording of some of those elements, it frees you up to then add the finer details in. You've got the time, you've got the headspace. And I think, as you mentioned earlier on as well, it's then uniformed across the practice, whether it's a GP doing it or an admin, whatever it may be. So that's really helpful in that it sounds like it's then taken away some of the uncomfortableness of the significant event process, and simplifying. And I think what goes alongside that is, and it's really encouraging to hear you talk about it, Jermaine, because it sounds like the leadership tone as well affects that conversation. Is that true from your experience, do you think, or is it more broader than that?
No, absolutely does. The first thing is it instantly makes delegation easier, because you can then delegate with the knowing that you're going to get a standard output, and it then forms a basis of a management plan. So if you have a weekly ops meeting with your management team, you're then saying, okay, okay, I'd like you to go and write this SEA up for me. I'd like you to then change this policy and cascade that to your reception team members because you made a change. Sometimes they might need a bit of time after the meeting. Can you just clarify this? Can we just double check this because I'm not quite sure, sort of thing. Actually now it becomes, okay, so you've got access to my practice manager. I'd really like it if you could type up the SEA, feed that into the policy, change that, cascade it to the staff to sign on the document manager, and then you sort of know in your head that you've got a bit of a guaranteed output as to what they're doing, and helping and delegation in the future is a bit easier. And because they've got a tool to support them with our help and our sort of sign off at the end, 5-10 minute catch up, how did that go, sort of thing, it makes the whole process a lot easier, and it empowers them as well to do it themselves in future and take it upon themselves to do, I can do this. I've had a meeting with the staff, this was a bit of an incident, I've typed it up using my practice manager, I've done this, and it makes things a lot easier in the future as well.
And then does that change almost the environment within the practice as well? It becomes more supportive, more open, more transparent, I guess. Is that what you're seeing as well as a result of these openness approaches, these simpler processes and so forth? Are you seeing a change there across the practice as well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's the instant time benefit that people are getting back, but then not only that actually, it's what comes then is, as you say, the openness, that somebody feels empowered to do something themselves. So they're not sort of like, I'm not sure about this, a bit afraid to sort of say, is this right, or should this be typed up like this? Because often people sit on those things and don't come to ask you because maybe everything's time pressured, or actually people just think, I can't do this, therefore I'll hope it goes away, sort of thing. But actually there's a tool now to help people, so it opens up conversations to say, oh, I've done this and it's amazing, sort of thing. Really, it's really good.
Yeah. And I think as well, significant events talked about kind of some of the ways it's currently done with practices, but looking at kind of what does a good significant event tool look like. If you walk us through kind of the form and the layout you guys have got with it, I presume it creates like a structured meeting approach. You're collecting the information in a particular order. It helps separate facts from emotion, maybe when people are filling in the form. Yeah, give us kind of like an overview of how you found that the process and the form you've built has then helped. Maybe talking about the example you had last Friday, kind of how does filling the form capture and bring that information out from the person who's filling it in?
Yeah, so all of our tools, including the SEA writer, is a very standard input box, and you can write as much or as little as you want there. The less you write, the more it will input for you and make suggestions with the output. The more you write, the more you're shaping and focusing the output yourself, which really helps. Because again, what we found is it's depending, level of understanding of SEAs, people who are completely new to the industry, or people who are perhaps starting at the start of an SEA that's just become aware of an incident and don't quite know what the output should be. They might be, for example, with the incident with the window being left open, you could easily just put into the input box, a member of our team was locking up on Friday night and left the window open and the alarm triggered. Press submit and see what comes out of it. It will still produce a beautifully written SEA. And Tom can talk about some of the technology behind that and how that works later. But we've got, and that will give you some standard outputs and control measures and things you could do differently next time, which you could then think about, and that could form the basis of your team discussion with your team members. Or you could go to the input box, you could copy and paste the minutes that you've asked your secretary to type up, who was minuting the meeting, where you've discussed everything comprehensively. You discuss what you'll do differently next time, what went well, and any policy changes. And again, it would understand that and form the basis of an SEA. Or you could type a very brief summary of the SEA. So this is what I tend to do when I'm using it, to be honest. So I tend to say, we had an SEA last Tuesday. It involved a staff member leaving a window open, which triggered the alarm. I went down to the site. It was secure. I told the key holders and the alarm company everything was fine. There was no need to send the police. The next day when I went in, I informed the admin team manager to pick that up in the next admin meeting. I attended the admin meeting myself and I spoke to everyone and said, look, I want to reassure you, no harm was done. Everything's fine. Just please be more vigilant next time. And can we have a look and make sure that the locking up procedure is pretty robust? And can we get the new staff to sign off on it, because some of the new staff hadn't, just tighten those things up. I just typed up a couple of lines like that and it produced an SEA. And again, when you've produced the output, if there's a few bits in there that it's added in that you don't think is quite right or doesn't quite flow with what you said, you can click the modify button and just take that out, or add bits in and it will do that for you. And when you're ready, you can export that to Word, PDF, and then store it in your SEA files.
Tom, Jermaine mentioned the technology there. So I imagine there can almost be a whole episode in itself with the tech behind it. But in a kind of a simplified process, kind of how does the technology work behind the scenes then to support Jermaine in this example in practice land?
You know what? Your listeners will have come across a lot of the technology that we're using. So it's very similar to ChatGPT or Copilot that's rolled out. I think the only secret sauce that we apply on top is that we've got some guardrails so that you don't have to. If you just ask anyone to go and write you an SEA up, there are different strategies around the world. There are different approaches. There are different standards. So completely devoid of all of that, if you just ask someone to do it, you will get quite different outputs, even with a nice standardized tool. So what we're doing is really layering on top of fairly kind of. I mean, they're magic tools, really, aren't they? They would have been magic 3 years ago. We would have thought that they were humans behind it, but now they're just AI, fairly standard AI, and we're layering on top of it. You know, our compliance library has kind of 600 documents in there, and so like every time you ask for something, it's pulling all the relevant ones and putting that into the AI so that it's not going off and randomly picking you up a kind of safeguarding from New Zealand or something policy that it might choose to do. It's giving you kind of NHS England guidance, and then but the actual kind of the SEA, it's just there's a standardized way of doing it that we've grabbed from the kind of the best source in the UK, and then we've just kind of applied that on top and said, okay, let's go and use this template. And that just gives you those guardrails. And I think, I don't know even if I'd thought about this until Jermaine brought it up in this conversation, really, but that power of being able to just delegate, I think that's quite powerful, really. That ability to just say, this is going to guide you as well as going to help you, which means that I don't have to give you a crash course every time I want to delegate something. I mean, I see it on Jermaine's face as the months go on. He gets more and more comfortable in his own role because I think it gets easier and easier to do a little bit, or at least some of those simpler things get a bit more straightforward. I think that's it's not very clever at all, really. It's just guardrails on top of some AI, which means that you don't have to do the typing, you do more of the thinking.
And I think one of those guardrails that Jermaine mentioned earlier that I find really encouraging with the platform is that it's CQC as well within that framework. So the output is going to be to a standard that CQC expect. That fear of, as you said, I've done the significant event, I've done the write-up, but is it accurate? Is it okay? You don't worry about that, because it's looking at the CQC framework as part of the technology in the background. So, again, another worry off my mind. One of the many worries of CQC on its own. So, you've got the reassurance. And then going back to what you're saying with the staff, then, it's and delegating. It's not only that you can then delegate it, but you can safely delegate it and know that the work's going to be complete. You haven't got to go back and check it over. And like you said, so it truly does release the time back to you. So it's kind of a win-win all around.
I think so. Some of the prompts that, so I've just pulled up the platform on my second screen here just to have a look through it, and so some of the prompts that I think it sort of asks itself around things like what happened during the event, what occurred, what's the impact on those involved, is it patients, carers, or staff? How could the situation have been handled differently? What lessons could we learn from this significant event? What actions or changes do we need to improve future outcomes? Who is responsible for implementing these changes? How would the changes be monitored and assessed or audited over time? If there's a personal reflection there, how did the event make you feel? And there were any contributing factors related to people, activities, or the environment around you on the lead up to the SEA. And the output that it puts out is Section 1 is a bit about the significant events, so what happened, what was the impact. Section 2 is a very detailed analysis of the contributing factors, so it brings in different things, so people factors, human system factors, activities, that kind of stuff. Section 3 is lessons learned. Section 4 is an action plan with monitoring and assessment going forward. Then at the end we have a bit of personal reflection conclusion, but we also have appendices, so when it's pulled bits of best guidance from somewhere or information from somewhere out there in UK primary care guidance, it lists them as appendices at the end of the SEA as well.
Wow. That's brilliant. So that is covering everything that you need, as I said, especially from the CQC point of view, but also just the internal practice monitoring and practice learning. It makes it easier to reflect on that and share it across the practice, which is ultimately the end goal, isn't it? To avoid it happening again. And presumably as well, we often look at significant events as kind of the negative, but presumably you can use the same platform to celebrate the positives, celebrate the learning and the positive when the positive events have gone well. Have you found it? I'm seeing you nodding your head. Have you found use cases with that as well then?
Yeah, and that's the other. So some of the other AI tools that we have are, again, we have like a social media post generator, we have a staff email generator. So yeah, if we had a positive event and someone wants to sort of demonstrate a change or that something good's happened, again, we see a lot of people using the staff email generator to send out a nice email to people on a Friday. And similarly, if something doesn't quite fit somewhere, you're not quite sure, we have the general assistant, and people use the general assistant quite heavily actually, where you can put something in there saying, this happened this week, we've had some really good feedback, or we've been really pushing Google reviews and we've been getting loads of good Google reviews. How can we promote this in the team? Seeing people asking the general assistant those kind of questions, and it just understands primary care and how practice runs. So it will say things like, have you thought about this sort of reward scheme? Have you thought about sending a nice email to the staff? Here's a sample email you could send, sort of things. Yeah, lots of different ways you could use our AI tools.
I think that's also it also surprises me something. The general assistant, I always assume that people will use their more generic tools out there, but I think just because it gets primary care and so won't randomly, 1 in 5 generate something completely off topic, I think that really resonates with people. It surprises me because I'm used to the more kind of the general stuff out there, but then I'm also, a tech guy, and I'm willing to tinker with things and put up with things being kind of wrong 50% of the time, and I just don't think normal people are willing to accept that level of craziness with their tooling. So
no, fair enough. So I suppose just as we wrap up then, one last question to you both, kind of what do you think's the one mindset shift then that will kind of makes the biggest difference with focusing today on kind of the significant events, but even in the more general sense where MyPM covers nearly everything within the practice manager role, what do you think kind of then a mindset shift, easy for me to say, if someone's going to take away from this episode, what should they implement kind of, from today onwards?
I think for me, it's the people that I've met during product demos or spoke to people during support calls for onboarding them to my practice manager, and just generally out there being in the community. Obviously, I'm a director of the Federation and pick up a lot of conversations with practices around Manchester and things like that. The mindset is overwhelmed. And, it just takes one little change to come out in the new GP contract to tip us over the edge if we thought we were trying to just survive with things like online triage, or thought we're just getting there with team recruitment, and then it turns out our long-standing receptionist just handed the notice in. There's only one little thing in general practice that needs to tip us over into being not able to cope for a few weeks while we try and repair what's happened. The key to my practice manager is it's not a standard way of working. It's designed to help people how they best work and make their processes more efficient, quicker, and documented in a standardized way that's acceptable to primary care, CQC, commissioners, etc. But I guess what I would say is, and again, you can book a demo on our website. I'm more than happy to speak to people and show people how to use it. But it's the art of delegation in a trusted way. So get used to using the tools yourself and understand how they can really see things through that feel overwhelming in your head. So you might get an email about a bit of guidance change, and you therefore need to know that you need to update 4 policies. Use the policy and SOP generator to change those policies for you quickly so that you can cascade them out to the staff members and in meetings. Once you got used to that, start delegating that to staff members. If you've got an idea in your head, practice managers are excellent at knowing exactly what everyone's doing at one point, because there's some organizations, who you can delegate things to.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's been overwhelming task in itself in your head, because having the time to sit down and maybe take a nurse out of a clinic when they're already sort of 6 weeks fully booked. Use our tools to make sure that you know how to delegate effectively, and make sure it plugs into a system going forward as well, where all the information is held in one place, so that going forward, you've got very presentable standard formats that you can demonstrate to the CQC, where everything's working really well.
That's a brilliant way to end the episode on. So thank you, Jermaine, Tom. Thank you both for joining us today, and for sharing such valuable insights. Jermaine mentioned about the website. We'll put the details of My Practice Manager in the show notes, and would really encourage you to check them out. Otherwise, I hope you have a lovely week, and we'll see you next week at the halfway point.
Yeah, thank you
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of The Halfway Point. We hope today's conversations have given you a fresh inspiration and practical ideas you can take straight back into your practice. You'll find all the links and resources we mentioned in the show notes at locumpm.co.uk. The Halfway Point is available on all major podcast platforms in both audio and video formats, so you can tune in however suits you best. If this episode helped you, we would genuinely love to hear from you. Leave us a review or a comment. Not only does it make our day, it also helps us shape future episodes around what matters most to you. Make sure you follow and subscribe so you do not miss next Wednesday's episode. And if you know a colleague who would benefit from this conversation, please share this episode with them. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn and Facebook by searching for the Locum Practice Manager. We're on YouTube too, where we share practical tips and tutorials for primary care managers. Until next time, keep moving forward, keep improving, and we'll see you again next week at The Halfway Point.